Welcome back. So, I want to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Toronto Maple Leafs are a team that is covered every single day, 24 hours a day in Canada, and I get it. I get it. But in this case, there's definitely something to talk about. This is a team that is not playing the same at home as they are on the road. So, there are various solutions teams find for this problem. Sometimes you need to, when you're at home, play like you're on the road. So, stay in a hotel, stick to your routine, and see if that pulls you out of it. And in some cases it might, and in other cases it won't. So for Toronto, this column here is their home games. This column here is their road games, and it's been a quite a different experience. So October the 11th, to open the season, it was a 6-5 shootout victory over Montreal. They trailed 2-0 in that game. They also trailed 5-3. So sloppy game, yes, but they get the shootout victory. No harm, no foul. October 14th, so 3 days later, at home against Minnesota, it's a 7-4 win. So focusing on the goals against is important from a defensive aspect, but they do get wins in those first two games. They trailed 1-0. They led 3-1 after the first period. It was a crazy game. They win it 7-4 over Minnesota. October 16th, the first loss shows up, and it's against Chicago. They lose 4-1. They trailed 3-1 after 2. And I remember the fans not very happy with that one. So with this one here against Chicago, that's your first real indication that things are not necessarily going as well as they should. Now, again, it's a sloppy opening night game against Montreal, but again, it's opening night. These things happen. So they go on the road. October 19th, playing against Florida, they lose 3-1. So, full-on panic stations at this stage. They trailed 2-0 after the first and just never recovered from that. Then they go to Tampa Bay and they win in overtime. It's what they do against Tampa. You win in overtime, 4-3. They trailed 3-1 after the second period. It was a good comeback win, and it was a goal by Tavares in overtime at 4:05 that wins it. So feel good there, and then they take that feeling, and a couple of days later, on October 24th in Washington, they win 4-1. They led 1-0 after the first. They never really challenged too much in that game. So, good start. Then on the 26th in Dallas, they win 4-1. And this is one of the most impressive victories of that road trip, maybe the most impressive victory. They led 1-0 after 1 and 2-1 after 2. They really controlled Dallas's offense in that game. On the 28th, it's an overtime loss against Nashville. So on this road trip, they lose that one against Nashville to round it out. They scored first in that game. Yossi had the game-winning goal at 2:13 of the overtime. But that's not a bad road trip, right? 3-0-1 road trip. If you don't count that first game against Florida, 3-1-1 if you do. Solid run. Now, do you bring it home? No. They come home, and the team waiting for them is the LA Kings. And again, the LA Kings are not a team that should be taken lightly, and yet I feel like they have been on some level. And, after the win last night over Vegas, maybe people start realizing, hey, these Kings could be for real. But on Halloween, in their return home from a successful road trip, they lose 4-1 against the Kings. They trailed 2-0 after 1. Now, to this point, I don't look at their schedule and think, well, this is a team that should be way better. This is a team that's really underachieved. I felt they were doing all right. And then they went to Boston. Now, this is an interesting one because it was a 3-2 shootout loss in Boston on November 2nd. They trailed 2-0 in the second period. They tied the game. And honestly, I thought they played really well in that game in Boston. And then after the game was done, all the reports I read were that they didn't. And so I was like, okay, well, all right then. They earned a point against Boston. A team's off to a really good start to the season. But the reporting on it was pretty negative. So their away record is 3-1-2, which is not bad, really, considering one regulation loss in 6 games on the road isn't a bad record. But it all depends on your home record. Well, they come back home on the 4th of November, and they lose 6-4 against Buffalo in a game where they scored first. And the one thing that Toronto has lacked throughout almost every home game is that intensity from shift to shift, that consistency, right? And I will talk about it. So, November the 6th, a couple nights later, a 6-5 sloppy win over the Tampa Bay Lightning. They scored first. They trailed 4-1 after the first period. They then fought their way back. They tied the game up. Yarncroke scores the game-winning goal at 46 seconds. So, much like against Montreal, they get the 2 points. It's not the prettiest way to get them, but they do. And that's 2 wins they've got against Tampa Bay Lightning, right? Good start against Tampa Bay. But then last night, November the 8th, they lose 6-3 at home against the Ottawa Senators. Again, they score first, but they can't maintain it. They can't keep it going. Moments in games right now where I feel like, okay, Toronto's taking over. This should be their game. It's not. So their record at home is 3-4. And what makes it even uglier is only one of those is in regulation. You have the overtime win against Tampa and the shootout win over Montreal. And they haven't played some of the better teams in the East, the better teams overall, right? So what's going to happen when they do? Now, for Toronto, their reputation has been one where they sometimes play down to the lesser opponents and they play up against the better opponents. So maybe they'll be fine when their schedule gets tougher. But one thing that I find interesting is this. Austin Matthews, 13 games, 13 goals, 6 assists, 19 points. Good, solid two-way forward. He does do some penalty killing this year. He's good on the power play. He's on pace for 82 goals, and yet still there's the criticism there. Well, they need a little more. The top 4 guys need to be better. It's not the top 4 guys that have been the problem. Nylander, 7 goals, 11 assists, 18 points in 13 games. Mitch Marner, 5 goals, 12 assists, 17 points in 13 games. And John Tavares, 5 goals, 9 assists, 14 points in 13 games. Those 4 players are playing well and scoring goals. The defensive numbers are ugly. I don't put that on their 4 offensive players. Just like if a team's not scoring, you won't hear, well, they're not scoring, but when was the last time Liljegren had some goals? And I understand he's hurt right now. I'm just using him as an example. You don't expect the defensive defenseman to get the offense. Well, you don't expect the offensive players to fix your goals against. I'm not saying they don't need to play defense. I'm not saying that at all. It is important to be a two-way forward in today's game. I'm just saying that when the defense falls apart, it kind of rests on the defense for the most part. Now, after you get past the core 4 and you get past Riley, Morgan Riley with 2 goals, 8 assists, 10 points in 13 games, his numbers are good. You get down to Yarncroke, 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points in 13 games. Not bad. Nyes, 3 goals, 4 assists. I agree with moving him up the lineup. I think that he's got the talent and the speed to succeed there. But then you get into the question marks. You've got Domi, 6 assists so far, no goals in 13 games. And with every passing game, back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know that Domi works here. Domi's been through a lot of teams, in part because this can happen, right? Where it just doesn't fit. Some places he fits very, very well, plays quite well, and in other cases it just doesn't work. So we'll see if Domi gets it, if it clicks. Maybe in their upcoming games he starts putting up more points and goals, but yeah, it's troubling. And then Klingberg, 5 assists in 13 games. So if we go back to not this past summer, but the summer before, Klingberg wanted a big long-term extension from Dallas. Dallas said no. Then he goes to market. He ends up firing his agent, doesn't get a long-term extension. He ends up signing a 1-year deal with Anaheim. Doesn't play particularly well in Anaheim, gets traded, plays okay after the trade, goes to free agency again, and Toronto signs him. What you're getting with Klingberg is you're getting a defenseman who is basically all on the offensive side, but defensively, he has to be paired with somebody who bails out some of his riskier decisions. Put it that way. And by adding him, well, you can't put him with Riley. Riley's not that defensive stalwart. And really, where I think the Leafs are missing is Muzzin. The fact that Jake Muzzin can't play anymore absolutely handicaps this team's blue line. If you have Muzzin in the lineup, I'm not saying that they don't have a bad record with Muzzin in the lineup at home. I'm saying that with Muzzin in the lineup, I think the defense would work differently. You'd have different pairings. And I will talk about the exits as well, and we can discuss that too. Because I do think that there are times in an offseason where you can overcorrect. And I do think that Toronto on some level is probably overcorrected. So Bertuzzi, 3 goals and an assist, 4 points in 13 games. I think Bertuzzi's played relatively well. I do feel with Bertuzzi you're getting a similar player as you're getting with Domi. Bertuzzi played some mediocre hockey with Detroit here and there, gets to Boston, and it just clicks. Played fantastic with Boston, and that's what Toronto would have been hoping for when they signed him. But the play, the points, the production, it's more along the lines of where it was in Detroit prior to the trade. Can he get hot? We know he can. But it's a matter of the patience to get through what they've been going through as a team. And I think one of the things to consider with Toronto is when you've got a couple of guys who are struggling, you could probably get through it. But when you've got a bunch of guys, you can talk about how there's different struggles going on. And then when you look at the number of them that are new players, I think that's where people rightfully will then point at Brad Treliving, right? Then you got Giordano, a goal and 2 assists for 3 points in 13 games. Giordano's 40 years of age. And as you get older, it is more and more difficult. And so for Giordano, he's winding it down. You can't be counting on him to be that 20-plus minute guy every night now. And I don't know that the defensive depth is where you want it to be if you're Toronto. And then you've got Reeves sitting with a -9. Reeves doesn't play a lot of minutes. I think it was last night's game, he was basically on the bench. I know in the Tampa Bay game he was on the bench late in the game. If you have a forward that late in the game you're like, we have to put him on the bench because we want to get goals, that to me in this day and age is a red flag. It was completely normal to have guys that didn't play in the third period. Basically the fourth line, once you got to the third period in the late 90s, early 2000s, that fourth line for a lot of teams gets parked, right? Your top 9 guys. But in this day and age, it stands out when you have a player that late in the game you're saying we can't put him out there. Klingberg's -8 stands out too. And again, plus minus, when you look at it and you look at it from an individual perspective, there's a few things you have to look at. Guy's a bad plus minus, you have to ask, does he get all the toughest matchups? Do Klingbergs or Reeves get the toughest matchups, right? Are they paired with somebody? Are they on a line with somebody who's hurting their numbers? Is also something you can throw into the plus minus. And is this team just generally a tire fire, so the plus minus you throw in the air? In Toronto's case, if you look at the overall defensive numbers, there are a couple that stand out. And to me, Keefe, Reeves, and Klingberg are the ones that stand out. And so for Sheldon Keefe, you've got a difficult position here where you're given all these new ingredients to put together this winning formula. It's not winning. And some of the ingredients seem to clash with one another. And then you get to in net. And I've got some advanced stats on the board here for this because it does show that Wall has been the better goalie. It's not necessarily close. First of all, Wall is 4-4. Samsonov is 2-1-2. Save percentage-wise, Wall has a .914 save percentage. Samsonov, .855. And that's troubling because, of course, Samsonov's the one that's getting paid. It's not like you're going to be trading him. It's not like you send him to the minors. What do you do, right? If Samsonov can't shake his way out of this, you kind of have to play him to get him through this. Now, when you look at goals saved above expected, Wall sits at a 7.4, this number from Money Puck, and Samsonov is a -5.1. Which means that goals saved above expected, that's 7 goals for Wall out of his 8 decisions. And in his 5, Samsonov has hurt the Leafs. So if you look at it and you think, Wall's been pretty good, you're right. The numbers show that he's been very good. But I wanted to look at this too from a perspective of over the last 4 years. Because this is not the first rodeo for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I also want to point out that they're 3-4 at home, they're 3-1-2 away from home. October, they were 5-3-1. November, 1-2-1. Last year, through 13 games, there were 7-4-2. This year, 6-5-2. There's only one game they lost that they won last year at this same point. So I saw a comment this morning of, well, the Leafs always start off great. No, they don't. They just don't. They usually actually start off pretty mediocre, sort of like this, and then they figure it out. But will they figure it out this year? Just because they have in previous seasons doesn't necessarily mean they do this year. So I've got 4 years worth of numbers here, and I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. Points percentage-wise, they're currently sitting at a .538. 2021, 2022, they had a .701 for their points percentage, and .688, .677. These are where the Leafs want to be. They want to be .677 and above when it comes to points percentage, right? .538 won't make the playoffs, just straight out. Goals for per game, they're sitting at 3.38. Last year, they had a 3.39. 2020, 2021, they had a 3.32. 2021, 2022, it was a 3.8. So really, outside of that outlier 2 seasons ago, their goals for per game is right around where it normally is. Now, goals against per game, it is a huge difference between where they are and where they've been. 2020, 2021, 2.64 goals against per game. The following season, 3.07, then 2.68. This year, 3.62. So again, defense, goaltending, this is your major issue if you're the Leafs, that consistency from shift to shift. The ability to bounce back after a goal against is another one I've noticed with Toronto. So yeah, that is your outlier because their goals for, they're right in where they were last year. So the offense is giving them what they need. They're not getting that shutdown at the other end of the ice. Power play, they're still right where they normally are. 28% right now. They were 26% last year, 27% the year before. The power play has not been a problem. That's why, and I'll agree too with the comment I saw about adding Klingberg seemed odd because they didn't have a problem with their power play last year. Accurate. Their penalty kill has dropped. So 82% is the high last year and the season before. 79% the year before that in the All-Canadian division. This year, 71%. It's not good enough. Interestingly enough, their hits per 60 minutes this year are the highest they've been out of the 4 years at 22.36 per 60 minutes. Their blocks per 60 minutes, also the highest they've been at 16.11. So their hits have gone up. But I've mentioned this before. Your hits total can also reflect how often you have the puck. Teams don't throw hits while they have the puck because that's interference. So when you don't have the puck and you throw a hit in order to get the puck, well, it means you haven't had it. So that's where the hits number, I sort of take it with a grain of salt. So if you want to be a negative Nelly about it, you could say, well, yeah, they're getting more hits because they don't have the puck as often. Now we look at scoring by period. One thing that stands out right away is they're not starting the game on time. Last year, they had 82 goals in the first period. They allowed 63. This year, they've scored 10. They've allowed 17. Can't continue. You can't be in a position where you're fighting your way from behind after the first period. Second period, also not as effective as last year. Last year, 108 goals scored, 69 goals allowed. So that's a goal differential of plus 39. This year, they've scored 17 and allowed 15, a differential of plus 2. So through the first two periods, their goal differential is a -5 right now. And last year, a plus 58. Now, that's over a full season. But again, if you multiply a -5, you're still getting a negative, right? And then the third period is basically the same. Last year, they scored 81. They allowed 79. This year, they've scored 15. They've allowed 14. They've carried on in the third period the way they did last year. And I don't know how happy Leafs fans were with how they finished games out last year. In the overtime, they allowed 9. They scored 7 last year. This year, they've scored twice, both against Tampa, and they've allowed 1, and that was against Nashville. So actually, in overtime, their numbers are mildly better. Now, the players who've exited, Bunting, he's playing all right for Tampa Bay. I don't know how much Toronto misses him, and again, the defensive numbers are an issue, so I don't see it there. O'Reilly, I think Toronto would love to have kept O'Reilly. Where does he fit under the cap with them? And O'Reilly decided to move on, right? So I don't know how much they were offering O'Reilly or what he would have wanted, but he moves on. Hall. Justin Hall moves on to Detroit, and honestly, I think he's been good in Detroit. Not saying he's great, I'm not saying he's a Norris Trophy winner, but he's been effective. Gustafsson, it didn't work out for him in Toronto. He's fitting in well with the Rangers. Aston Reese, still waiting to see where Aston Reese is going to end up on a score sheet this year in the National Hockey League. Simmons, well, Simmons was winding down his career, and I see Reeves as kind of playing a similar role to what Simmons did. Lafferty, great gift that Toronto gave to Vancouver by sending Lafferty out west. Lafferty's been one of those bottom 6 guys that has helped make the Canucks a very good team this year. He has 3 goals and 3 assists. Fantastic. And again, if the Leafs had decided to keep Lafferty and not sign at least 1 or 2 of the guys they had, who knows? They'd be getting better scoring from their depth guys. And then Kerfoot. Kerfoot's just got 3 assists this year, so it's not like he's putting up a ton of points, but it is depth down the middle. And I don't know if the replacements for him in the lineup have necessarily done a great job of making people forget Kerfoot. But at any rate, this is a Leafs team that has changed a lot. And this is what I was talking about, where sometimes as a GM you can overcorrect. You look at Toronto and go, man, they just can't get over the top. We've got to change this. And there will be people calling on, well, you've got to trade Nylander now, and you've got to make these huge moves. And in the end, it can work. It absolutely can work, but it can also take your team further away from your goal rather than getting closer to. And there's very little that's more frustrating as a fan of sports, no matter what sport that is, than watching your team make moves when they're at least a contender or seen as a contender, and those moves pull them away from being a contender. So for anybody who wants to say, well, it really can't get much worse, it can. We've seen it get worse in hockey, and here's to hoping that it doesn't. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. What should Toronto do? You've got a goaltender that's not playing well. You kind of need to have him in the net to get his confidence back. You've got a defense that's not playing particularly well either. The team is better on the road than at home. How do you bring that road game home? How do you tune out the fans? Are they trying to do the fancy hockey in front of the fans, and it's more meat and potatoes on the road? They're not trying to dazzle, so they're more sound in their play, and they stay in the systems a little more. That kind of thing. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I guess final question, are they going to pull their way out of this, and they're going to get on a nice winning streak, and we're going to forget all about this by Christmas? Or will we be talking about, hey, there's a new coach, and they made big deals, and are they better? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. If you haven't already hit like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it if you did. I will talk to you again soon.